All right, let's call a meeting to order. Councilman Bowden, you give us a few words, please.
Do a moment of silence, please. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We got a pretty thin agenda because we got one great subject that we need to debate. I'll take
Mr. Chairman, I do have a quick public service update I'd like to give you just real quick. It won't take but 1 minute on two items.
Let's do this. Let me get the minutes approved from the 27th.
Okay, yes, sir.
And I'll come to you. Item B, let's get a motion to approve the minutes from February 27th.
Second.
Probably moving second. Any question on those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. O'Brien, you're
up. Yes, sir. Two quick items. I wanted to report, Matt's out today, but environmental services, the last couple of weeks, we've had to work on Fridays due to vegetative increase in trash, which is normal this time of year with spring cleaning and stuff, but it's only on Fridays, and we are getting everything collected. So I wanted to report that. If you have any issues in your districts, please let us know. We'll be glad to follow up on those for you. The other thing is, with great joy, I announced it in talking to Jim O'Connor from JMT, it looks like we're going to be able to bid the Daniel Island Bridge finally in this year. So we're really happy about that. And working with the council member over there, we're probably going to have another public meeting just to refresh everybody's memory on that process. But we hope to get started this summer and do the bulk of the work this summer while the children are out of school, so we won't disrupt the traffic as much as possible. But I just wanted to report those two things to everybody.
Oh, that's good news. Yeah, it's great news. Does Councilmember Gregg know about that?
Yes, sir. We actually have a weekly call. I've had him participate in now, so he's on the call and knows where we are with everything. So we're in really good shape on that.
Good news. Good news. All right. Item H. Mr. Fountain, discussion on the ordinance to prohibit the use of slab on grade.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to share my screen for a very brief walkthrough presentation. So again, just an update on the slab on grade ordinance. I did want to make a very important early note on the version that was provided out. I think there was some confusion in drafting on how the city defines multifamily versus townhome properties. So we do need to strike out the one remaining location where it talks about multifamily restrictions. The intent is not to restrict multifamily buildings. The intent was to restrict single family attached, which we've added in those requirements, but we would take out that line multifamily. Because again, with the city, that's basically any building type that has 3 or more units. So you get into apartment buildings, mixed use buildings, all those get classified as residential use rather than commercial use based on that multifamily. So I just want to make a quick clarification that that's a restriction that we're not intending to implement on like mixed use buildings or apartment buildings, those types of things.
Okay.
So heading into that, just again, very, very brief overview. We saw this at the council workshop, but this came out of a lot of the work that was done with the Dutch Dialects Charleston. Dale, obviously, Mr. Morris spoke very eloquently on this, and I would not try to replicate that myself, but basically, the history is on the slide here. Obviously, we had the Dutch experts and a team of international water experts come in. And one of the target areas they spoke about in a number of places within the Dutch dialogues was the risk of adding fill in areas where you can either create flooding by restricting flow, push flooding onto neighboring properties, and then also, of course, damage kind of future resiliency and ecological value of those properties. So if anyone has any questions on that, certainly Dale or I can chime in, but I think we're pretty familiar with that. Process to date, again, we talked about this at the council workshop, but just as a refresher, started this in 2019, 2020, where we started looking at restrictions on fill citywide. We had some draft ordinances that were proposed. None of them were adopted. We did, in the 2020 Stormwater Design Standards Manual, address fill within especially larger development sites or more complex development sites to show that there would be no impact of flooding from the use of that fill. But we did not significantly regulate small individual properties. With that manual, it's not the intent of how the manual is currently set up or phrased. The state regulations also do not generally regulate properties under about an acre in size, especially for single family residential.
And that your screen is not progressing.
Well, that's the downside of using the presentation mode. I will go this route instead. That tends to be more successful. You seen the process to date screen, Rick?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Now it's progressing.
Thank you. So again, 2020 and 2021, that's when Mr. Morris and I started reaching out with key stakeholders, talking about how could we work to reduce fill impacts, especially in higher flood risk areas. We brought about a stakeholder work group through the spring and summer of 2022, including a number of city staff from stormwater, affordable housing, planning, preservation, sustainability, resilience and sustainability, public services. Talk about how would this fit within the current city regulatory framework and what negative potential consequences would we want to write the regulation to avoid. We also then spoke with a number of outside groups, including the home builders, the realtors, Coastal Conservation League, Southern Environmental Law Center, Historic Charleston, and the Metro Chamber of Commerce. Worked through putting together these requirements, gotten generally pretty good support. We heard that again in great detail from the groups at the council workshop, which was in November of 2022. Took that back, drafted this ordinance, now are presenting the ordinance for discussion tonight with the intent to bring it back for a first reading at the next Public Works Utilities meeting at the end of the month, to be basically read out at council as first reading, and kind of in following some of the proposed language for how ordinances would be brought in the future, with kind of that cooling off period between its introduction at a committee and then its adoption for first reading at council, to make sure everyone has a time to read through it and address any comments. So just a, again, brief update of what this written ordinance does. It's a relatively straightforward, short adjustment to our existing floodplain management work within Chapter 27. It does regulate construction of new single-family residential building foundations. It does not require modifications to existing foundations in any situations. It does not ban placement of any kind of fill on properties where you can't move dirt or place dirt on your property. And it does not regulate foundations in mixed-use buildings, commercial, industrial, institutional properties, and those larger scale properties, frequently which require a slab on grade for fire code and some other challenges that they deal with. Where, again, we came in the council workshop to the generally, I think, well-supported conclusion to go with the 100-year floodplain. This is already regulated and mapped by the city. It works in our existing permitting process, so it's not as much of a regulatory burden either for applicants or for the city to manage it. Generally our highest risk area for tidal flooding and much of our rainfall flooding. Just a reminder of what that looks like in different parts of the city. You're basically looking at that kind of darker tan color in the peninsula. So you can see the Meeting and King Street are kind of coming out of that area, but the rest of the peninsula generally being in that area. And then as you start to look in surrounding areas, you can see on the right what you'd see for Cainhoy, Daniel Island, what you'd see for Johns Island on the left or James Island on the right. And then what you'd see in West Ashley for regulation. So certainly significant portions of the city, but not a totality. So it was I think it was a good initial area of what we should regulate. High risk areas, not the entirety of the city at this point. How or when, so again, single family detached residential, that's like a standalone single family home. Basically, you cannot build your new foundations anymore on slab on grade or elevated slab, which has a slab with a stem wall under it, where you're basically filling the dirt still, but elevating the slab. We did say for single family attached, those are townhomes generally, that you cannot build a traditional slab on grade, but you would be eligible to build that elevated slab due to the larger building shape. And this would be implemented on new building permits that were applied for, new foundation permits that were applied for starting January 1st, 2024, to make sure builders have knowledge about what they're coming in for. We've certainly been talking about this for quite a long time with builders. After that, we certainly recommend that council read into part of the adoption of any ordinance, a request for staff to bring this back for discussion, 12 to 18 months, similar to what we do with the Stormwater Design Standards Manual, where the stakeholder groups would come in and give us an update on how it's working for them, what we're seeing, any changes that we think we should make. And that would be, do we look at basically reducing any of those requirements or increasing those requirements? And certainly that would have to come back through council if we do make any changes. And we would bring that report back to Public Works and Utilities Committee, originally with results and recommendations to consider any additional rulemaking. So that was the length of my presentation, and I am happy to talk about any questions in more detail.
All right. Questions? Councilmember Bowden.
Why is it that the attached single family housing has, or it allows the elevated slab? I just didn't understand that part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a couple of reasons we looked at that, Councilmember Bowden. One was planning and zoning to some extent. I don't certainly want to speak for the departments, but generally had some commentary that typically townhomes are looking to sort of fill an affordability space between standalone single family and apartments, so that's a slightly cheaper method for construction, which helps keep them in that zone while still severely limiting the amount of fill that's used. And then when you're looking at, part of the reason to go with a more elevated foundation is you have the ability to raise the building in the future. And those larger multi-unit townhomes are a little more challenging for elevation to get everybody on the same page and do that kind of construction. So there were also some comments in that were not maybe quite as heavily weighed about the attractiveness of an elevated townhome. That was one concern that we didn't take as much weight into, that there, an elevated slab is still elevated, obviously. So we kind of split the difference on that one a little bit, but that was the intent of providing that slight difference there.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Chairman Waring, and I'm just very happy to see that this work continues. I think this is a great example of a diverse group of stakeholders coming together to talk about how we can address an issue that we're all well aware of, which is flooding and homes that are built in a manner that is not ideal for where they're located. And I just want to make sure that as these conversations continue, we keep that synergy and that consensus operating, so that the community really can be united when it comes time to us ultimately considering and hopefully passing an ordinance that doesn't ban fill and build, but it comes about as close as you can in a reasonable manner to doing so. And I think that's an accomplishment we can all be proud of. I just want to make sure we're keeping everybody in the loop as we go along.
Any other questions, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Shahid?
I don't really have any questions, but I think to Councilmember Appel's point that we have been inclusive throughout getting to where we've gotten. I've gotten numerous compliments from our friends at the Chamber of Commerce that this was a real collaborative effort, that everyone agrees this is a reasonable approach to move forward. So thanks to all who have worked on it, and I'd like to see us move it forward.
Good. Councilman Shahid, any input?
Well, I think we've discussed this thing and beaten this horse so bad that I'm glad to come to some kind of resolution on it, quite frankly. I mean, we've gone full circle on this thing. I mean, I sat in those workshops we had when it came to the stormwater manual. Matt, I can't remember. That seemed like 100 years ago to me now, but it was very technical and painstaking. And so long ago, it was Gary White was on that committee with me, and that's how far back we were going with that. And I know we talked about a complete ban before, but this seems like a very sensible approach to what we're addressing here, and making these adjustments. So
I agree.
Yeah, so on our agenda, it would just says discussion of ordinance. Are we going to vote on it today or just for discussion?
No, it's just for discussion today.
Okay.
Um,
So is
Mr.
our plan to bring this before city council, or is our plan to modify our stormwater manual? What's
So
our next step with this?
the staff's preference is to bring this back to Public Works Utilities Committee as a formal
Okay,
first reading out to council in that chapter 27 of our ordinance at the next Public Works Utilities Committee meeting, incorporating any comments we were to receive today, to make sure that everyone is fully aware of the final language of the ordinance, not just the concept of the ordinance before we try to read it into the record for the first reading.
Okay. Mr. Fountain, let me ask 1 or 2 questions. You say, how do you define higher flood risk areas?
So in this ordinance, it only applies within the special flood hazard area, which is the FEMA mapped 100-year floodplain.
Okay. Well, let me break it down, I guess, to a homeowner. A homeowner has a lot that's, I don't know, has a topography on it of 13 feet. So under this ordinance, you go to build a single family house, you don't bring in any dirt, so you just go up to, I think we're at 15 and a half, or freeboard plus 2 or whatever that definition is. So you get a topo of about 15.5, and that'll be your entry level floor. Under this ordinance, how does that work?
So it will depend on what your flood elevation is on your property. So we have flood elevations in the city, and I'd have to see what our lowest one reads at, but frequently a 7, 8, 9, 10, basically 8,
Right.
somewhere between 7 and 10 feet elevation. So you would have to elevate your first floor under the existing city ordinances to whatever your flood elevation is for your property plus 2 feet for new construction.
Right.
This ordinance doesn't prohibit you from bringing in any fill. It just says that you can't only accomplish that elevation with fill.
With fill.
You have to still have a crawl space or a some other method of elevation, whether it's all the way, drive under with pier and beam, or whether it's just a crawl space elevation.
Yeah. Mr. Morris, I don't want you to feel left out. Do you have any input?
No, sir. Matt did a great job of explaining this. Again, it was a process with the various stakeholders, and they're on board. I informally talked with them about this over the last couple of weeks once the ordinance draft had been developed. So they are still on board, and that's an accomplishment, I think. So I have nothing to add to Matt's technical explanation. He does it best.
No, he does do a good job. Listen, this has been an ordinance a future ordinance process that started out with people talking at one another. And now it looks like we're all talking with one another and kind of moving in the right direction. And Councilman Sheed was right. I mean, we started out with this when Councilman White was on Public Works at the time. So it's been, I don't know, maybe half a decade worth of work on this one. So come around the curb, sure good doing it together as opposed to, getting in that proverbial circle and pulling out the gun, shooting at one another. We're not doing that on this one. So I congratulate Mr. Fountain, Mr. Morris, all the team, obviously council members who took the extra time, the mayor. This has been a good process. So I kind of look forward to the language and the ordinance coming forward. Any last input? With that, I look forward to seeing all of y'all tomorrow. Stand adjourned.